Hey, Happy New Year. How's it going? I'm gonna talk about this redesign that I did over the holidays. I'm gonna hit play. So fantastic VFX animation. Found this on Artstation, and I was like, I'm gonna do something. I gotta do something. I've got all this time off. Why not do something? And so, yeah, the challenge that I set was like, I'm gonna do an hour. Time box it to an hour, and I just want to use my mouth sounds as the source for this. And so this is the design session, and then I've got a recording session. I'll walk through this quickly. First, a little behind the scenes. So that was the recording, and this is the template that I use for editing my recordings. So I'll typically power down the PC, and I have the mix pre in my room, and I'm just recording into that. I want to keep the noise floor as quiet as possible. And so in my edit session, I've got, the template's kind of set up between a safety track where I bring in the file straight off the SD card and I leave it there and I never touch it and I mute it and I just want to have a backup. And then I've got raw, edit, and final. So raw is where I just have the mics that I used, clean up in RX if need be. In this case, there was a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that the source that I was using was as good as possible. I think the mantra behind the way I kind of do most things, or at least definitely with this thing, is going slow in the beginning to go fast in the second half. So I just want to make sure that the stuff that I'm using, if I'm limiting it to mouth sounds, it's not like a mess by the time I'm wanting to start experimenting with some design stuff. And so, yeah, I guess one thing that I'll show on here is a nice trick when you're using, any mic paired with Sankin, is to do a roll off of the low end on the Sankin just to retain the ultrasonics and the high frequency content, and then the inverse on the 8040. I don't want to double up the body of the Sankin with the 8040. There's no reason to. So I print that after doing that, a little cleanup, a little EQ, print that here, keep it there, duplicate it, and then I do an edit, and I keep just a reference here just as a kind of guideline. And then I bring that edit down into this final folder where I just group it based on the type of sound that happened to come out of my mouth at the time. It was pretty free form. So it's a lot of like, okay, what group does this belong to? And it's pretty loosey-goosey. And so I'll take that and I'll bring it into Sound Miner. And then in Sound Miner, I like to just listen to stuff, maybe get... I like to get out of Reaper and just familiarize myself with the thing that I've done in a different context and mess around with pitch, reversing it, maybe DSP rack, but in this case I didn't. And so then I've got it all in Sound Miner. I go over to this redesign session where I've gone through and I've placed markers and then just built groups around that. That's kind of the way I chose to work this time, where I was like, okay, these are the things. We've got a spawn and a despawn, and then, it blinks into existence. There's a little bit of a black hole before the beam is launched, or whatever a beam does. I'll think of the word later. And so in this, I've got my mix bus here, where I've got, an FX bus and a sends bus. I'm using reverb lightly for things like the spawn, I think. And then, one thing that I like to do is have a bunch of different reverbs, and inactivate the ones that I didn't like. So I'll, in this case, those are already here in this little folder template or track template that I dropped in. And in this case, I just chose to use M Turbo Reverb. And then, so as you can see in this, there's a lot of stuff that didn't make the cut, a lot of experimenting. But I would say, being time boxed to an hour, it was a lot of like, well, I'll just show you right now. It's a lot of bring the source in, do a lot of experimentation. None of this really would come together if it wasn't for some kind of rolling sampler. NVK Create is a great example of that. And it's just bringing stuff in, trying out long, cool chains of different effects, seeing what worked. And then I think the key part of this is that, like, not wasting any of that work. If something works, grab it off that sampler, bring it in to this folder, conveniently named renders that I like. And so with this, I'll just play a few of those back. And so I was just trying to get as much stuff out of the voice sounds as I could. You can see the processing is pretty heavy-handed, but what can you do? This doesn't look like it would come from mouth sounds, this VFX, so I had to be a little bit liberal with my effects chains. And so one thing I like to do is you can see the ones that I like, I typically have clip gain on them, as well as a bit of further post-processing just to clean them up, because things can get pretty wild. In some instances, you know, using Pro Q3 with a filter sweep automated. Yeah. I had a feeling that one was going to be loud, so thank God I hit that pause button. And then there's one track where I've done, you know, a lot of further processing, you know, whether it's trying to make some cool whooshes with Traveler or some kind of Doppler. And yeah, anyways, that is the process just for designing stuff. And then I go in and lay those out and see what works, what seems to stick to what the picture is showing, and what doesn't work. You know, there's a lot more of that in this instance, and some of these are pretty straightforward, you know, like maybe 2 or 3 sounds that made it from the renders that I like into the design. And if I had more time, I definitely would make this beam more prominent. You know, it's pretty just sparky right now, but I was pretty happy with like the way these sparks came out. And so that, you know, I think one problem with this workflow is that it is going fast. So if there is something you're like, I want to go back and tweak that, unless you're really organized, too bad, so sad, but that's cool. You know, in this case, this isn't the way that I'd work in any official capacity. But for something like those electricity chains, I think I retained some of the chain. I could go back and find one thing that, you know, is really helpful with that kind of stuff that I'll show. I have no idea how this is going to sound right now. Is Transgressor, to be able to solo just the transient is really awesome for stuff like this, for these kind of like sparky electricity sounds. You know, pretty self-explanatory, I guess, but yeah. So I guess just to wrap this up, I'll go through and I'll just do a little walkthrough of each of these groups, see what they sound like. So this is a cool one, is using Crystallizer for a little bit of extra oomph, which in context sounds like that. There's this sound that at the time I placed the marker, I thought it would go over here. Turns out blink in this case was really the punch of the impact on the beam. And so these are these two like kind of Tesla coil sounds that came out of some of the experimentation. There's a whole bunch of those, but I brought these two in. I had a few other things I was trying out, but one thing I had to do with these was just pitch match them to make sure that they sounded more like one cohesive thing, you know, otherwise they can sound a little dissonant without that. And then the beam itself is really simple. I mean, there were some other things that I tried. Yeah, a lot of stuff that just didn't make it. Womp womp is that sound. Yeah, and then the despawn, which is just two sounds. I think one reversed. Yeah, anyways, that is the jam. If we went into the FX chains, this would be another 20 minutes, I'm sure. But happy to, field any kind of questions that might come out from this. And that's the workflow. Pretty straightforward, but maybe there's something in there that you find interesting. I don't know. Let me know.